Okay, welcome back. And now we're going to move on to two more systems, the lymphatic and the endocrine system. So we're going to hit on hormones a little bit. And don't freak out. I know hormone cycles can sound quite scary, but today we're just going to appreciate what they are and where they're all controlled and regulated by. So let's get into it. So I'm just going to introduce the lymphatic system briefly. As I mentioned, when we talk about the immune system later on, we will go over this in more detail. This is more on chapter 17, sorry. Basically, it's just a system of tubes running inside your blood vessels. So it's kind of shown in green right here. And one of the things that you kind of notice if you're feeling sick, you can actually check your lymph nodes and they'll be kind of inflamed. Or if there's something wrong, like health problems, that's one thing they're going to actually check, so your lymph nodes, and see if that's a problem. It's most often associated with immune system problems. And one thing that we actually see the lymph system do is transport excess tissue fluid, or this extracellular fluid, and return it to your veins to rejoin your blood. So this lymph is, it's a tissue fluid while it's in your vessels. And your system can include all the network, but also has your tonsils, your adenoids, your spleen, and your thymus. Now, it does help with transportation of nutrients and waste, but the main role is with the immune system. But most of this lecture is going to talk about the endocrine system. Now, the system is this internal system that helps with regulation and communication involving hormones. So we'll talk about hormones on the next slide, your secreting glands and the responding cells. So pretty much how everything communicates together. What it's going to do, it's going to send this chemical signal, which is a hormone, around the body via the blood vessels. So we're going to have like a control center. We have areas that produce the hormones, and we have areas that control the actual production centers. Now, you're going to have different glands. You're going to have endocrine glands, which are going to be the ones that release the hormones within the body into your blood or your lymph system. And those happen to be your pancreas, your adrenal glands, your thyroid, pituitary gland, and gonads. So this is where you start to see hormone stuff come in. And then the exocrine glands, which are going to excrete material that's not hormones out of the body. So this is your sweat and your salivary glands right here. So what is a hormone? Well, they're just chemical signals. That's all they are. They're made up of proteins, and they're going to be released. And what they're going to do is regulate activity of muscles, organs, or other tissues. What they can do is cause these feedback loops to happen. It might cause a gene to start being upregulated and then go through the process of transcription. It could cause a feedback loop within a cell. There's all kinds of different things that they can do. Now, what they do is they travel through the circulatory system and they look for a target. Now, that's what's great about hormones. They just don't go everywhere. They have to find a certain target either on the external part of the cell or the internal part of the cell in order for it to have an influence. So it has to find its appropriate receptor. Now, there are protein hormones. They're going to bind to receptors on the cell surface right here. So here we have an example. Your hormones are shown in pink. What they do is bind to the surface protein receptor. And what that does is it causes a signaling cascade that might lead to a change internally. Maybe a gene might be upregulated or turned off. There are certain hormones which are made of steroids, which are your fats. What they will do is they're able to, since they are that lipid composition, they can easily go through that lipid bilayer, and they bind to receptors on the inside. So these can go through directly and probably have some kind of regulatory effect on the inside. Now, as I mentioned, hormones can affect many things. Your blood pressure, body growth, reproduction, and many other processes are all regulated by hormones. So as I mentioned, there's different receptors. Now, as these hormones go through and travel in your bloodstream to the target cells, it has to find the specific receptor. Now, if it doesn't find the receptor, the hormone just eventually will get broken down if it doesn't get to where it's supposed to be. But once it finds the receptor, it's that lock and key model like I kind of talked about with enzymes and how they work. It has to find the appropriate receptor, and it's going to bind to. Sometimes it will cause all kinds of different change. It could be a signaling cascade. A lot of them will actually trigger certain genes that will then cause certain proteins to be regulated. We can have these changes. One thing to notice with hormones is, it takes a little bit of time. Think about it. It has to be produced in one area, travel in the circulatory system to the target cell, bind to the receptor. If it's something that's going to be regulating transcription, it has to go into the nucleus, bind to the transcription start site probably. Maybe it's an activator, cause the mRNA to be made. Then we got to go through the process of translation into a protein, and then we'll get that process. Now, hormones can be upregulating or downregulating. There's different kinds of things depending on how sensitive your body becomes receptive to these different types of hormone levels. So here are a few of the key players. So deep within your brain, you have the hypothalamus. Very, very, very deep in there, shown in this kind of teal color right here. Now, he's like a big boss, big control right here. He's going to regulate body temperature, hunger, thirst, and reproduction. So your hypothalamus, this little part here in the center of your brain, this is a good regulatory area. Now, he's going to be super important because he's going to release his key hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH, and that's going to be then transported to the pituitary gland, which is going to be located right next to it. Now, it's right under the hypothalamus, and we kind of break it up into an anterior and a posterior lobe. Now, the posterior lobe is going to store and release oxytocin and antidiuretic hormones. The anterior lobe, shown on green right here, is going to respond to hormones from the hypothalamus. So pretty much the posterior is not as much under control of the hypothalamus as this anterior part. Now, this is where we're going to see growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, a lot of stuff you're going to see in reproduction, luteinizing hormone, anticorticotropic hormone are all going to come from this anterior lobe. So a lot of these that you're going to see in the reproductive chapter are all coming from right here. So that's why when they tell you teenager brains are kind of crazy, it's all what's going on right in this area right here. So some other parts of your endocrine system are your thyroid and adrenal glands. Now, what your thyroid does is it produces these iodine-based hormones that increase the metabolic rate. All right, so if you're seeing some people that might have some weight problems, they might actually check their thyroid to see if it's working properly. If thyroid is not working, maybe that's influencing low metabolism, and that could be causing some problems. Now, this is going to be located in your neck, below the larynx, in front of your trachea. So this is one thing that people really need to look at, really go and evaluate if there's been like weight problems or being tired. There's all kinds of different things and problems that can be a result from problems with your thyroid gland. Now, your adrenal glands are going to be located on top of your kidneys, and what they do is produce hormones in response to stressful situations. And it could be both physical and emotional. We have encountered all kinds of stress. This has been a stressful year. Don't feel bad if you've been stressed out this year. Everyone has. I missed a classroom. I miss seeing you guys so much. I hate that I wasn't able to see some of my students for both 1408 and 1409. Blame it on your adrenal glands and all that stress. Now, it is going to produce certain hormones. So you might have heard of epinephrine or adrenaline. And this is going to help with that fight or flight response. So when you're kind of like antsy and all the other stuff in a very, scary environment. So what that does is it causes certain body systems to kind of reduce their function, and then triggers more energy available to the ones you need for flight. So let's shut down the digestive and put more energy towards your muscle system. It also produces corticoids, examples cortisol. And that's really important for help regulating your salt and water balance. That's why they're right there with the kidneys. Now, the pancreas, like I said, he's kind of an accessory organ, but he's also part of this endocrine system. So what he does, he goes through and secretes digestive juices to the small intestine, and also secretes insulin into the blood. That's why he falls in this category right here, because of the production of insulin. Now, as I mentioned, this is the one thing my dog has to battle with all the time. It's located between your stomach and the proximal portion of your small intestine. Now, what it does is when it notices your blood sugar gets too high, it's going to release insulin, and that's going to cause your cells to uptake glucose. So get more of that glucose out of your blood, and then we're going to store it. All right. And something also associated with that in glucose levels is diabetes. So the diabetes, my mouth is failing me again, is a disorder where cells do not take up glucose. So what we can do is we have high blood sugar, and then that will lead to excess urination, which will ultimately lead to dehydration. There are different types of diabetes. There's type 1. This is where the pancreas does not produce insulin. This is a problem because you have problems with your T cells that are attacking your pancreas, and this is mostly due to genetics, and you can't regulate this. And then there's type 2, where your pancreas produces insulin, but your muscle cells don't respond to it. And this is most often associated with obesity and low activity levels. And you can regulate this, but it requires changes in diet and exercise. So the last bit of this is just going to introduce your gonads, and we'll talk about more about them when it comes to the reproduction chapter. So you have, hey Ravel, my dog's right underneath me. So you have your testes, which are from the male, produce all your androgens, and one of my key one you might think about is testosterone. And females, you do have testosterone too in us. You'll do a case study on testosterone in athletes. I think that's one of them. I hope it is. If not, I'm sorry. But what testosterone does allows the development of the secondary sex characteristics, and for males, it's really important for production of sperm. Now, for us females, we have our ovaries that are essential for producing estrogen and progesterone. And what these two hormones do help regulate your secondary sex characteristics, production of eggs, controls pregnancy, and prepares your body for childbirth. The menstrual cycle for us girls, I just put this up here so you can appreciate how complex we are and why you just need to leave us alone on certain times of the month. Or if you're on birth control, maybe once every 3 months, I don't know. It all has to do, but you can see all these different hormone levels. You can see what it does to body level, body temperature. This is the lining of your inside of your uterus, your endometrial lining. But what you can see is when you follow these different hormones, you see like levels go up, and there's like this sudden spike, in a few months. In LH and estradiol, these spike. Follicle stimulating is on that one too. And then you'll see them suddenly drop down, and you'll see an increase in progesterone. So this is why we're a hot mess during ovulation. So think about all this is going on. When we get to the reproductive chapter, we'll go over this a little bit more. So a little bit, there's some review videos if you're interested, and of course the credit to the images.